Governor, your timing is impeccable because all of us get to hear from one of this country's great figures in neuroscience and the brain and what happens in the earliest learning years. If you go ask people in Washington and lots of other states, including Florida, to identify this nation's most respected thinkers and researchers on the brain in those early years, you very often would hear the name of Dr. Pat Levitt. He has a distinguished pedigree, leadership in Los Angeles now at both the University of Southern California and Children's Hospital, including director of both the program in developmental neurogenics and the neuroscience graduate program at USC. And before then, he led Vanderbilt's Kennedy Center for Children with Developmental Disabilities. So if you Googled Dr. Levitt, you would find every bit of that information, but you couldn't find these 4 items. Number 1, what he calls his primary addiction are granddaughters Molly and Jordan, ages 3.5 and 3 months. I live, he would tell you, in the basking glow of what grandparents can do. Many of you can relate to that. Number 2, that when he and Harla were raising their children, Sarah and Sam, quote, we were so exhausted sometimes that we really didn't have time to observe. And now with my grandchildren, I can see development in action. And number 3, that he once was a political science major at the University of Chicago, but he took a developmental biology class and it, quote, opened my eyes to the world of child development. His PhD is in neuroscience from the University of California at San Diego, with a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University. And meanwhile, and moreover, his wife deciding to depart her work as a financial executive to become a teacher, pre-K to 8th grade, quote, got me to thinking how neuroscience could inform her work and propel the future of children in the country. And number 4, I probably shouldn't even mention his devotion to 1960s reruns of the Dick Van Dyke Show and his passion for basketball, which he once played, and tonight he will be rooting for Connecticut. Last week he told me he was rooting for Florida, so you know. Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged to have with us today one of this country's foremost go-to experts on policy and the power of the early years, Dr. Pat Levitt.
Dave, that was special. I've been introduced often, but not quite as powerfully as that. So I'm up. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see a crowded room. This is just fantastic, and I've met a lot of people today. I'm great with faces, but terrible with names. I don't have a lot of time. Dave has insisted that, as opposed to the 6 years we take to train a PhD in neuroscience, I have 20 minutes to make you a neuroscientist. So I'm starting my clock, and I'm going to start, Dave, hopefully. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Child development is the foundation of prosperous communities. You're going to understand at the end of the 20 minutes why that is the case that we can make from the science, as well as from just the gut instincts that you all have, that starting early matters, and almost anything that you do in life, starting early matters. Brains are built over time from the bottom up, right? Who here took up golf as an adult? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. How many of you started as children? Okay, all of you are better than the ones who started as adults. Genes and experience together build brains, and they're particularly important because the brain is different than any other organ in your body. The brain requires experience in order to continue to develop. The heart, the kidney, the liver, I love them all. They're some of my favorite organs. But the brain requires experience. The thing about the brain and experience is that it doesn't differentiate between good experience and bad experience. It uses them to build the architecture, the circuits that are going to be with that individual for a lifetime, just like you build a house. So the architecture early and its health matters. And you heard before, our focus, our obsession has been about education, but education follows from building strong foundations in the domains that I'm going to talk about. Cognitive, social, and emotional development are inextricably intertwined. That's hard to say for somebody who used to stutter. But they're inseparable, and you're going to know why from a brain science perspective. Toxic stress damages brain architecture. There's no doubt about that. Resilience is not an internal character strength that we just have. You're weak, you're strong. But it's built. It's actually built through a combination of impact of genes, what we inherit from mom or dad, and the experiences that we have. And then finally, for many functions, the brain's capacity for change decreases over time. The ability to change, you adult golfers, as much as you like to correct that slice, good luck. So, policy changes based on neuroscience. This is the take-home message I put in the second slide. Invest early. Reduces special needs. In California, we have a definition for special needs that includes children who can't read. They go into special needs classrooms. I did a survey in almost every state I've looked at. It's 4 times more expensive to have a child in a special needs classroom than it is in a typical classroom. Unhealthy populations, you'll hear about that. Increased emotionally sound, learning-ready children with sound executive function. That's the key, and you'll know why. So invest early. There's a major increase. This is not for me. I'm not an economist. I read their papers. Major increase in human capital via a ready workforce. Look and see where businesses settle. That's what they look at first. And I believe with all my heart, it's patriotic. So let's get started with some brain science. Experience shapes brain architecture. This is what the brain looks like at birth. Those are brain cells that you see. This is what it looks like at 6 years. It looks like the garden that you haven't thatched. During 0 to 3, I mentioned 0 to 3. That's good, right? There you go. Okay. Infants and toddlers make 700 nerve connections, synapses, a second. So snap your fingers. A second, not a minute, not an hour, a second. So that's what's going on in their brains. Now, by 14 years of age, those are pruned back through experience. The most important connections based on experience are the ones that are soldered, right? Those are the ones that are kept. The ones that are not used go away. So this is a very dynamic process that requires experiences in order to drive this. So here's a take-home reminder. Development is not a blank slate. Children are not sponges. I may take an extra 30 seconds for this story, Dave. So there are many songbirds in this world, and they each have a special song that the male songbirds have to learn in order to attract their mate. It's required for survival of the species. So neuroscientists did this very profound experiment. They taped the song and played it to a juvenile bird, and they were surprised to find out that the juvenile bird did not learn the song. Couldn't learn it. Then they said, I'll get clever. I'll take a stuffed bird, put it on the perch with the juvenile, put the little microphone in the back, and play the song. Didn't learn it. What did the juvenile bird need to learn that song, which is responsible for their survival, to be able to mate? They needed a live tutor. Basically, the same mechanisms of how we learn how to read, language, etc. Here we go.
What's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through battling facial expressions and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who can engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
Serve and return is what matters. This is a statistic I'll show you in terms of brain growth that's connected to poverty. Right? This is between the ages of birth and 3 years of age. As far as I know, infants are not controlling their own brain growth. Right? This is what it looks like if you're 400% above the federal poverty level. This is what brain growth looks like if you're between 200 and 400%, slight, small change. This is what it looks like if you're 200% below the poverty level. This is just, you know, SES is a proxy for a lot of issues, but that's brain growth. There's about a 20% difference between the blue line and the green line, right? These are interconnected: growth, learning, and social emotional control. What you see up there are the brain structures that are responsible for all of those skills. So they're responsible for fear and anxiety circuits. They're responsible for tuning our ability to control our emotions as children and adults as we grow up. These are the circuits that are responsible for learning and memory. They're the same circuits. So toxic stress that occurs early damages these particular parts of the brain. In particular, they affect not just your social and emotional well-being, they affect your ability to learn as well. It's the same brain structures, the same ones that share responsibility. Now, the key that we know now from about 20 to 30 years of research is executive functions. They're complex. There are air traffic control system that does all sorts of things that matter to you when you hire people for your businesses. So, for example, children and adolescents learn to control their attention, what to pay attention to, what to filter out when they're in environments in which they need to focus. Working memory representations, how to take that and remember what you need to do, just like the air traffic controller needs to remember the pattern of how the plane should be coming in. Long-term memory, emotional regulation. The last thing you want when you're making a critical decision is to be not emotionally under control. Actions, you actually do something. That's what executive function is all about. So how do we test executive function? You're all going to participate. I need your help. Okay, you're going to get everybody to participate. Okay. Read what I just put up there, please. Out loud. Okay, say the name of the color that the word is printed in. No hesitation here. Say it again. Say the name of the color that the word is printed in. Go ahead.
Green, black, yellow.
Okay. So, you know, your response inhibition was terrible. Your ability to control. We can test, this is executive function. The ability to, here's the instructions. I'm saying the name of the color the word is printed in, not the name that the word says, blue, right? So early executive function disruptions. It's remarkable, the connection between what we can measure early and the predictions for what happens later in life. These are expensive problems. This is a study that's been going on for 30 years, the famous Dunedin study. I'm not going to show you the effects on the brain. I'm just going to show you some things that we all care about. Health outcomes. Low EF, low executive function, is up here where the circle just appeared. Very poor health outcomes. High executive function, tested as toddlers. These are 30 and 40-year-olds who are being evaluated for their health. Look at the differences. This is adult criminal convictions. Low executive function is toddlers, over 40%. High executive function, 10%. Credit rating scores. Look at the difference between low EF and high EF. Adult wealth outcomes, which we all care about. Low EF down here, high EF up here. Those are enormous differences that have been tracked. Multiple studies, not just the Dunedin study.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, The extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Okay, so here are the sources of toxic stress in the United States. Almost 80% is neglect, severe neglect, right? You can look at the rest, and the numbers are published. So the absence, for the brain, the absence of experience, the absence of making that connection, that serve and return, is deadly. So why does toxic stress have such long-lasting effects? What do we know? So it has a powerful impact on brain architecture. Here's an example. You don't need to be a neuroscientist to see that neuron, that brain cell that says toxic stress is much smaller and spindly than the one that says normal. It reduces the size of those cells, and it reduces the connections of those cells that those cells make, that the brain cells make. This is brain activity. It's like comparing a 20-watt light bulb to a 150-watt light bulb. Red means more brain activity. It's unbelievable. Our epigenome, we change the chemistry of the DNA we inherit from mom or dad through experience. It changes. It controls when and where our genes are used during development and even as adults, right? So there are chemical changes to our DNA that occur due to toxic stress, due to malnutrition, due to oxidative stressors, all sorts of things that I can go on and on about that my family says, please stop. So what are the signs of early executive function disruption? Uncontrolled behavior, low persistence, aggressiveness, impulsiveness, inattention. These lead to liability and behavioral disinhibition, things that the impulse control we don't have. Talk to any teacher in a classroom, any educator about this. They don't talk about IQ. We don't talk about IQ. IQ doesn't really make predictions about how you're going to end up as an adult. There's very poor predictors. This is a very strong predictor. What does it predict? Nicotine dependence increase, alcohol dependence increase, incarceration rates increase, drug use increase, physical illness, increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Your blood pressure will be 20 points plus higher. Study just came out by economists who demonstrate that. Cancer, obesity, diabetes risk, mental illness, all of these. So, normal brain plasticity, this is what it looks like. Early on at birth and before, it's very high. It drops down over the years. Now, executive function is acquired over a period of time, even into your 20s. So that's really important to think about, that programs that start early but then continue will have a strong impact. And anybody who has a teenager, if you believe that brain development is over when they become a teenager, we're all in big trouble. All in big trouble. This is what it takes in terms of physiological effort and dollars in order to fix things later. Right? It just doesn't make any sense. So investments that do work, plan from pregnancy and look beyond education and healthcare. Serve and return, executive functions, things that matter in terms of interaction with family, with community. These are simple fixes, actually. The brain is wonderful in embracing this as the most important element that you can provide for an infant and a toddler. Invest in development and retention of a skilled workforce in early childhood and education. Ensure that vulnerable children have access, et cetera, et cetera. Targeting executive function in children and in the caregivers who need executive functions in order to be good caregivers, good primary caregivers, good parents. So, I have 2 minutes left. Just stand here, I can tell this story. So, you know how many times he told me I had to finish in 20 minutes? I've spoken in front of 10,000 people. He makes me more nervous.
All of us.
All of you, right? Right, good governor? Unbelievable. Okay, so this is Art Rolnick. He's in the middle. You can probably tell he's the adult. Art was head of the research for the Minnesota Federal Reserve. His expertise is pre-Civil War currency. Go figure. Art did a study in 2003 to demonstrate the economic benefits of investment in early programs, the return on investment. So he started something in Minneapolis because he was so convinced that a free market approach to early in Minneapolis could really work. And so he started by talking to the CEOs of small little mom and pop shops like Cargill and Ecolab and Target and Best Buy. I guess they're not so small. And he got them involved in putting up some dollars to do a fabulous piece of work in which he basically provided scholarships for early child care centers with one little thing that they had to fulfill. He also instituted a program to evaluate them because at the time Minnesota didn't have program evaluation. You could use the scholarship wherever you wanted to as a family. You could make that decision, but it had to be a 4 or 5 star program, right? In parts of Minneapolis, there was never a preschool program before there became, the 2 opened because they made it reasonable to be able to run preschools with high quality teachers in those programs. They now are 4 or 5 years out. The measures are unbelievable in terms of off the charts. In communities in which there was such dramatic depression and outright failure about early childhood. So, as Art says, 18% return is a heck of a lot better than my 401k. That's the calculated conservative return that he has made through his economic studies. So, you all believe this? This is a first fundamental. This is what got me into developmental biology and studying the brain. A baby, here we go. That was 18 minutes. A baby alone does not exist. If you remember that and you remember serve and return, then it was worth my trip through Dallas to get to Tallahassee. So remember, early investment does have an increase in human capital workforce. You look at the places that are really paying attention to this. That's where growth, economic growth and development, family stability, all those things are happening in a super way. It's patriotic. And I'll leave you with Molly and Jordan. Thank you.